What's up, everybody? I want to talk about something that actually I think I've got a few videos that I've done about this before. I know I have some that I've done on Instagram, short videos. A lot of people, one of the concerns, ironically, this is both where Republicans and Democrats worry about it, is gun rights. And people worry about the government coming and taking your guns. And we're always assured by the government that the government will never just come and take your property without charging you with a crime. So they assure us that there's no way that they could just come and take your legally owned firearms. The government is lying to you. The government can do it legally because they've been doing something under the radar and falsely labeling it. A lot of you have probably heard of the term civil asset forfeiture. And what happens is, when you've heard this term, you hear the stories about the big drug kingpin that they went and they got. And then what they did is they actually wound up using criminal asset forfeiture to take that money. Sometimes they use civil asset forfeiture, but there's no need to use civil asset forfeiture because since there's a crime involved, they could take everything that this big drug kingpin owns using criminal asset forfeiture, which I fully support. I am 100% behind the idea of criminal asset forfeiture. I have absolutely no argument at all against it, because if you're convicted of a crime, and when it comes to things like drugs, money laundering, running a prostitution ring, selling illegal cigarettes, things like that, it's easy to tie the money or even property. It's, pretty much everything that person owns, it's easy to tie it to the crime. So I'm 100% behind this. But most of the time, what happens is what's known as civil asset forfeiture. But when the police get up there, they might show something where, they'll be like, yeah, we pulled this guy over and we confiscated $50,000. And they don't tell you anything about any kind of crime or anything. They just tell you that they're protecting the highways and they confiscated $50,000 from this gentleman. Or maybe they confiscated $100,000 from this gentleman. Or maybe they confiscated $150,000 from this gentleman or woman. Either or, it doesn't really matter. But what they don't tell you is that the person was not charged with any kind of crime at all. And the majority of the people that they take that money from, they're people like me and you. They're just your average person who's traveling with cash. I drive a truck and I don't even travel with cash anymore because of this. I actually have a prepaid credit card that I use, and I never put anything more on that card than what I need. And the only way I can add anything more than that card than what I need is I have to use a PIN number. This way here, they cannot just take everything I own the way they do it to truck drivers too. They'll pull over a truck driver and, not charge him with any kind of crime at all. And they'll be like, why do you have $40,000 in cash on you? I'm on my way to buy a truck. Oh, well, that doesn't sound reasonable. Why doesn't that sound reasonable? because you're traveling with $40,000 in cash. I'm going to buy a truck. They don't accept a check. I'm buying this truck from a private individual. They don't accept it. They don't want to accept a check. It's too complicated to wire money. There's no way that I can just use a Western Union for $40,000. A cashier's check is the same problems as a check. So I'm going to buy a truck. And they just take the money. And then they destroy the man's business. Because everything he owns is right there. He took out a loan of maybe $20,000 against the one truck that he already owns. And now he's at risk of losing that truck. And he's lost the second truck. And he's lost $40,000 in cash. And he did not commit any crime at all. Not a single crime at all. They just took his money. That's a true story. I don't know about the fact of whether or not that, he actually took a loan out on his first truck, but if I remember right, it was his second truck that he was going to buy. That's a true story. Happened in Texas. Of all the places in the world, this happened in Texas. In Texas, they don't care that you have a constitutional right to travel with as much money as you want. They just took his money. I'm a car guy. Do you know what for those of you that aren't car people, this will be hard for you to understand, but those of you that are car people, you're going to get it right away. How much does your average 69 Chevelle SS sell for? How much does your 1969 Super B sell for? How much does your average 1970 Dodge Daytona sell for? How much does your average 1957 convertible in near showroom condition sell for? These are classic cars. We're not even talking about exotic cars. We're just talking about classic cars. How many of you that own these cars, when you're selling them, you're going to sell them only cash? Cash only. You're not going to deal with the hassle of the cashier check and the traveler's check, anything like that that could be fraudulent. So we're talking about roughly $100,000. Some of the cars are down around $70,000. Some of the cars are up around $125,000, $130,000. So we're talking an average of $70,000 or $100,000 for those cars, for that collection of cars each. They average out to $100,000. Some of them, let's say you have one of the rare 1970 or 71 Cuda ragtops. It needs restoration, but you have a true 1970 or 71 Cuda ragtop. You've owned the car since it was new. It's sat in your barn for the last 30 years, 40 years. It's rusted. It needs a lot of work. But you could realistically, the car could have no floorboards in it at all. It could have a seized up motor in it. The motor can be completely locked up in this thing. The transmission in this thing could be locked up. The rear end in this thing can be locked up. And you can still sell that car today for $200,000. But you're only going to deal with people with cash. It's not unrealistic. And for those of you that don't understand, that car is worth over $1 million. That's why you can sell it for $200,000 with all that kind of issues with it. You can sell that car easily $200,000. So it's not unrealistic to be traveling with cash when you're dealing with car collectors, when you're dealing with business owners. Maybe you own a laundromat in South Carolina and you're going and you want to start expanding and you found a really great deal for a laundromat in Alabama or Louisiana. I can't remember which it was. So you're traveling with the cash. You're going to buy this business. and they just take your money away. That happened also. Surprisingly, there's a number of people out there that have lost everything they've owned for doing nothing more than legally traveling with cash. In the United States, you're allowed to travel with as much money as you want within the confines of the United States, because we deal in cash. We're a cash economy. Yeah, granted, now, credit cards are becoming more popular, but still, cash is king. And a lot of times when you deal in cash, you can get a better deal. Like that $250,000 CUDA that I told you about. You probably get that for $175,000 when you're handing them actual hard cash. You can get a really great deal on that $1 million car. Granted, like I said, needs a lot of work. You're probably going to put $200,000 to $300,000 in that car. But the fact of the matter is, by the time you put the $200,000 to $300,000 in that car and you paid $175,000 cash for it, you're going to double your money. Why would you not deal in cash if you can? So that's what civil asset forfeiture is. It's not criminal asset forfeiture. You didn't commit any crime. You got pulled over. You got pulled over for doing 5 over. And they find the cash in your car. They didn't even write you a ticket for doing the 5 over. They didn't charge you with any kind of crime outside of even if they wrote you the ticket, they still don't charge you with any kind of crime. They just take the money because they say you might have, you might be, or you are in the process of possibly committing a crime. Absolutely no evidence at all. Let's say I've been looking for a car because I want to travel the country. And one of the cars I've been looking at I found really great deals on some Jaguar convertibles. I actually don't like Jaguars, especially the coupes. I think the coupes are just ugly cars. The 4-door is an ugly car, but there's something about the convertible that it just looks really, really classy. And I've actually considered it. And it's actually still at the top of my list while I'm looking for cars for, something that I want to buy in the next couple years. And the Jaguar, surprisingly, is up there on the top of my list. There's a couple other cars that are really second and third, but, I'm looking at, that's my top 10, or they're all kind of tied in the second and third slots. And they're really close to that Jaguar. There's a couple different, and I'm just trying to find something, I really like classic cars, and I'm really trying to find the perfect classic car. But if I can't, I have a particular generation of Jaguar that I'm really interested in. And I might actually go with the Jaguar, even though I've never liked Jaguars. It definitely has to be an XJS. Needs that 12-cylinder. Because if I'm going to go with the Jaguar, I'm going with the top dog. Speaking of classic cars, I just watched the freaking $150,000 car go by. It's a trailer queen, but it looked like a 67 or 68 Super B. I mean, it was being trailered. It's maybe you get up close, it might be, $100,000 car, $85,000 car. Let's say you're traveling down the road with that car. Do you know if you get pulled over for just anything? Maybe you rolled the stop sign. Maybe you brushed the fog line or you brushed the yellow line. And you get pulled over for that. And they find absolutely nothing that they can write you a ticket for. They could take the car. They could take the car that you're trailering. Your beloved Super B. Your beloved 57 Chevy. Your beloved Lamborghini Diablo. Your beloved Lamborghini Countach. One that I actually really am a big fan of, your beloved DB9 or DB10, DB5. They could take any of them. They could just take them. They could say, well, we think. They don't even have to say you were. They could just say, we think it was involved in a crime. Or it's going to be used in a crime. Or it was begotten by some criminal activity. Even though you might not even have a criminal record. Not even absolutely a criminal record. I don't have a criminal record. There's things that would come up on my record, but I'm not a criminal. I don't have an actual criminal record. I have where I've had run-ins with the police, but I do not have an actual criminal record. Everything is pretty much, everything that's on my record are all violations or fines of some kind. Traffic violations or violations other than traffic violations. Like when I got into an accident and the cop arrested me for, in New York State, you have the right to choose who tows your vehicle. And I said anybody but one particular tow company could tow my vehicle. So the officer grabbed me by the neck and choked me and slammed me down on the ground and arrested me for, I can't remember what it was, but it was a $110 fine. It was a violation for simply saying anybody but one tow company can tow the car. I said anybody else can tow it. I don't care who you have tow it except them. I do not want them towing my car. But he was getting a kickback from them, so he got upset. It's the only thing I could figure is he was getting a kickback. But, that's the kind of things that are on my record. I don't have any actual criminal record on my record. Let's say you're traveling and you're going through a state where they're just trying to take everybody's guns. Surprisingly, this is becoming an issue in Texas. We lose Texas, man. We lose the country. I don't understand what's going on in Texas. I wanted to move to Texas so bad, but Texas, I don't understand what's going on. They have absolutely no respect for the Constitution in Texas anymore. The police, not the people. The people still love the Constitution, but the police are arresting journalists. They're arresting lawyers. They're arresting legal gun owners. They just arrested. I don't understand what's going on in Texas. I really wanted to move to Texas. I refuse to move to Texas now. I'm afraid to move to Texas. But let's say you're traveling through Texas and you're going through Dallas and you have your gun collection with you because you're moving from, say, Alabama to somewhere in mid-Texas. So you're traveling and you have all your guns with you, your gun collection with you. You have 20 guns, 25 guns. You have a gun collection that you've built up your whole life. Let's say you're in your late 50s. Or maybe you're even in your early 60s and you're getting ready to retire, and that's why you're moving to mid-Texas. You want to retire there. So you got your first gun when you were 12 years old, 11 years old, 10 years old. But you've been collecting guns for all these years. So you got this gun collection of, let's say, 25, 30 guns. All different. And you get pulled over for something stupid. Maybe you were doing 5 over. Maybe you rolled the stop sign. You touched the line. They feel you were traveling too close to somebody. Or maybe you actually are breaking a law and you're doing 85 and a 70. You actually are committing a crime. Let's say you even are committing a crime. A violation. So they pull you over. Then they search your vehicle. Then they find your whole gun collection. They could take your gun collection. They could just take it. And then on top of it all, they're going to decide not even to give you the ticket for doing 15 over. They're going to give you a warning. They're going to give you a warning for exceeding the speed limit. They're not even going to put down how fast you were going. They're just going to give you a speed warning. But they're going to take all your guns. They can do it legally with civil asset forfeiture. And when the government decides to come after your guns, that's exactly how the government is going to come after your guns. They're going to do it with civil asset forfeiture. And there's a big problem going on in the United States right now. To understand something about what's going on in the United States right now, and for some reason, the Supreme Court just decided this is all constitutional, because looking at the Constitution in context of when and why it was written is completely irrelevant. If they would actually look at the Constitution as to when and why it was written, it's 100% relevant. The Constitution, one of the big things that led to a lot of things that are in the Constitution are because of things that led up to the Revolutionary War. Leading up to the Revolutionary War, the English knew that a revolution was brewing. They knew this well ahead of time. They probably, 3-4 years ahead of time, they knew. So the first thing they started doing was they would just walk up to somebody and say, "Who are you? You need to tell me who you are." Today we call it stop and ID. A lot of states have where you actually have to be, it could be anything. It could be jaywalking, or, it could just be, they really make it really broad, but for almost anything. But you actually need a police interaction other than just a simple casual interaction to be ID'd. You could be doing absolutely nothing wrong at all, and they can say somebody said you were doing something wrong, and then you're required to ID in a lot of states. This is what's called intelligence collection, because they need to know, okay, well, we've seen this person talking to this person. We know this person had, they like guns. This person is outspoken against the government. This person is outspoken against the police. And you, as just doing absolutely nothing wrong, they've seen you with one of these people. So they just walk up to you in the street and they say somebody was complaining about you, or you fit the description of what somebody made a complaint about. So then they require you to ID yourself. A lot of people think when they do this, they're looking for warrants. Finding the warrants is a side effect of this. What is being done is intelligence collection. Because when everything's going in a database, the connections are all being made. Despite what they tell you, the connections are all being made. And it was all originally done in the context of fighting gang violence. Now, granted, I was actually one of the people that supported this when collecting this kind of intelligence was about gang violence. But that's not what it's about anymore. Now it's about who speaks out against the government, who speaks out against the police, who's a strong believer in the Constitution, who's a strong believer in the Second Amendment, who's a strong believer in holding government accountable. That's what collecting all the ID is about now. Because they're still using the same database that they used to use during all the war on gang violence. They're going to say they're not, but the fact of the matter is it's still the same database. They're still running the same database, so everything is still going in there the same. And so the connections are still being all made in that database. They're going to say it's not, but... And then, if they do admit to it, they're going to say, well, it's just a side effect of interactions. It's not a side effect, it's intentional. When the government decides they're going to come after guns, because of stop and ID, just like the British did, leading up to just a year or two before the Revolutionary War, with all this intel that they collected using stop and ID. That's what the British did, stop and ID. Then they go and they start using stop and frisk. And then they just start using civil asset forfeiture to take the guns away from people. That's what the British did leading up to the Revolutionary War. That's why stop and ID, stop and frisk, and civil asset forfeiture are all unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. But the Supreme Court says context of the Constitution doesn't matter. The reason why we have the Fourth Amendment doesn't matter. Therefore, the Supreme Court said, and a lot of you think the Supreme Court leans right? Really? A lot of you believe the Supreme Court leans right. The Supreme Court does not lean right. The Supreme Court does not lean left. The Supreme Court leans government. Stop and frisk is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court knows it. Stop and ID is unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court knows it. Civil asset forfeiture, not to be confused with criminal asset forfeiture, is unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court knows it. But the Supreme Court does not lean right. The Supreme Court does not lean left. The Supreme Court leans government. When the government decides they're going to come after your guns, they're going to use that database that they built up using stop and ID, and then they're going to go out and they're going to use stop and frisk, and then they're going to take everybody's guns under civil asset forfeiture. That's how the government will come after your guns.